welcome to the Evolving Spiritual Practice podcast. My name is Ralph Cree, and this is brought to you in association with bodyheartmindspirit.co.uk. Today I speak with Michael Garfield, who does a couple of really cool podcasts. One's called Future Fossils, and the other is called the Complexity Podcast. And we talked, his Future Fossils podcast is a lot about the weirdness of the moment we're all living through, this sort of particular passage of history. And we talked today about the weirdness and how to live in it, what the weirdness is, and we talked a fair bit about technology and the impact of technology on our lives. This is a very rambling and liminal conversation. I think it's the type of conversation a lot of people are having at the moment. It's an honest conversation. It's an exploration, a wander in the wilderness. I very much enjoyed it. And I highly recommend you check out Michael's stuff all over the internet. Look in the show notes. I'll link to all of it because he's got quite a big output. And he's a really interesting guy. Michael Garfield, welcome to the Evolving Spiritual Practice podcast.
My thanks to you, sir.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm very generous of you to give you time like this. I've been binging on your podcast, Future Fossils, which I think is really, really awesome. And I love it.
Thank you. You're very kind.
Congratulations. So, I definitely will be pointing people to your podcast, which covers all things kind of weird, and leave it at that. And what I was, wanting to explore with you today was the kind of weirdness that's happening, where we're kind of inexorably hurtling towards a seamless meshing with machines, and you've described the internet as a cathedral brain, which I just love that term. And it's like this cathedral brain is creeping slowly towards our bodies. It all kind of started out with desktops, then we got laptops, and then smartphones, and then we got brain implants. And then beyond that, which is something I've heard you talking about, is kind of organic biological computing, using DNA as a storage, and like growing bacteria on a motherboard and things, and that kind of, so it's like the machine is coming inside us, and we're becoming, we can be dragged. That's the direction of travel, and we can be dragged into that, kicking and screaming, which I think we're all going to be doing that anyway, because the rate of change is so quick. It's like coming up on some mushroom trip that you never quite break through into, the good zone. It's just like an endless coming up. I think about the printing. When the printing press came out, people were freaking out in a similar way, and we can kind of look back at that now and think, oh, how quaint. But I think there were actually some genuine crises that happened when the printing press came out, and that was the first time disinformation was spread and those sort of things. But what I wanted to explore with you today is that I think the kind of paradox and weirdness of our time is a bit like thinking of Don Juan, the sorcerer from the Carlos Castaneda book. He describes a worthy foe, a worthy opponent has been a great thing in your life. And I think this kind of white knuckle ride into this it makes you think. There was a Superman movie when I watched as a kid in the 80s where this woman kind of gets sucked into this like machine and she starts turning into a robot, and it's just a kind of she comes out and she's actually comes out super powerful. I think she's got laser eyes and things like that. But just that process really horrified me as a kid. And something you talk a lot about is this sort of imagery of Jurassic Park as this kind of symbol for our time, that you think you're doing all these cool things with technology, and then nature finds a way to just turn it to hell. For you, great for nature, but it's we're all nature. But what I wanted to explore is that I think that the story we tell about the time we're living through is really important. And you watch documentaries like The Social Dilemma and things like that, and you kind of feel like we're being dragged into this kind of macerating machine of social hell. And but I think this is often brought up that in the Chinese have the symbol for crisis also means opportunity. So I think I'm really keen to imagine how this kind of meshing with machine and bringing the internet into our lives, embracing it, can actually potentiate us, so we can become X-Men, rather than some kind of Frankenstein, So there we go. That's my kind of context I was hoping we might explore. And this podcast is all about how we grow as people and expand our sense of identity. And I think you could look at The Social Dilemma points to how our identities are being narrowed, fragmented and narrowed and constrained. But there's also these currents going in the opposite direction. That I say some of your older podcast episodes, you got quite dewy-eyed about some of these things, the cathedral brain and us all being wired together and that. But I think as maybe in later episodes, you've got a bit more I don't know, pessimistic about it. So I don't know whether I'm dragging you back to a gone Michael Garfield, or am I hitting something current?
First of all, Ralph, let me thank you for emancipating me from being the only person I know who asks long questions.
Yeah.
I seriously catch so much heat for these 5-minute questions that I like to ask people. But that's just it. This is a performance of the phenomenon that we're living through right now, which is the connecting of things to other things. The let's call it an ecosystem, because that's what it is, of all of these interoperable agents. It's dirty to talk about it like this, to me, in some sense, to speak in like formal scientific language about this, to strip things down such that you can talk about the agency of a piece of software in the same way and in the same breath that you can talk about the agency of a human being. But, I work day in and out at a place where they're trying to make progress on a fundamental theory of life and living systems.
That's the Santa Fe Institute?
Yes. Yeah. And so to see that work, and, while I am not myself a researcher in the sense that they understand it, I have been studying this for, 15, 20 years. And yeah, there's, the reason that I was so attracted to work in this place is because of this question about, well, like, where does all of this come from? What is this? These are very fundamental questions. And these are the kinds of questions that complex systems science is attempting to answer in its way. I don't consider its way totalizing or adequate in all cases, because it only addresses basically the relationships between things. It addresses, objects and processes. It doesn't really address experiences and meaning. And I think that's an important distinction to make. But nonetheless, the insights gleaned from a study of general evolutionary theory get us to a place where we can think of the world as essentially alive, where we get past this notion that life is a qualitatively or ontologically different type of thing than non-life. That mind and intelligence and experience and all these other things that we associate with life are in some way implicit in everything else as well, even when we do not find it there in an obvious way. And, so for instance, a few years ago on the second episode of Complexity podcast, the other show that I host for the Santa Fe Institute, when I had our president, David Krakauer, on a conversation about the origins of life, an ongoing area of research here, he said that he takes a radical position, but he believes that life is best defined in terms of patterns of information, and therefore that in the moment that you pour milk into coffee, that there is a transient, rudimentary form of life in the swirling of your milk and coffee together.
Didn't someone do the mathematics for that recently and won a prize? An English guy.
Well, there
was that
actually,
no? Was that was it? I think no. It was stirring a coffee.
Yeah,
I know that. Yeah.
So there were actually 3 people were recently rewarded the Nobel Prize in Physics for work in complex systems, and that's a watershed as far as the history of science is concerned, because what we're talking about here is starting to understand that the relations of things, the patterns of their interaction, are as important as their sort of intrinsic qualities, or what they are, as like there's these 2 kind of trends or 2 veins that you can traverse in this way of thinking. One is like the reductionist mode, where it's like, well, to understand something you pull it apart, and the other is to understand something you have to like observe it in action. So
it's like Descartes pulling dogs apart to try and
right,
find their mind.
Right. Yeah, that doesn't work.
No.
No, it doesn't. And I actually believe that the emergent approach doesn't find mind really either, but it does give us more insight to mind than the trying to find it in the pieces of a dog. So there's 2 veins, right? One is let me analyze this thing by understanding its different components, what they are. The other is, well, let's just run this thing. This shows up in relations between attempts, for instance, to understand the economy in algebra, where you have all the known variables, and you have an equation. It may be immense and baroque, but you have this. It's there. It's on paper. These are the resources going here. These are the players involved. But the economy actually generates a lot of novelty. It's innovative, and algebra doesn't capture that. And in order to try and make sense of the innovation that happens through interaction of economic agents, you need to release your concerns about attempting to completely understand an economy. And by economy, I mean anything in which value is exchanged. So that the way I think and speak about economy includes all of ecology, right? Because really, ultimately, ecology is, I think, the mother of all of that. There is, I remember in college, my introduction to this corner of the conversation was through someone coming into one of my courses to tell us that the entire human economy rested on quote unquote ecosystem services provided by the rainforest and other natural systems that predate us, such like the carbon cycle, the water cycle, etc. That if we were to try and reproduce these things mechanically, it would require 10 times more money than is in existence. It's basically, there's no way that we can actually, all of these things that we have ignored in our calculus of value. And that's important to this understanding. I just want to, so there's a couple pieces here. One is that if, there's you lose the forest for the trees of reductionist analytical thinking, where pulling things apart to see how they work, you lose a sense for their interactions. That's not obvious. But then it's also true that the more that you run vast agent-based simulations of something, the more that you just study and live with the nonlinear, emergent indeterminacy of the real world, you also lose, you gain understanding, but you lose predictive power. And so there's these two threads that are tugging against each other, and they manifest in sort of in the modern sense, they manifest on one hand in sort of AI, machine learning, where you can take millions and millions or billions of parameters, plug them into a weighted model, or like a weighted setup that allows them. It's a model of a neural network, but it doesn't know what it's looking at. It doesn't understand the data at all. It has no inferences or opinions about it, and then it just does this massive correlative calculation, and that's one kind of thinking, right? That's the kind of thinking that actually works really well for prediction. That's what nearly everyone is talking about in artificial intelligence, and that's why this concern that you addressed earlier about the way that we're starting to feel confined by the algorithms of the social web, as they try to, unbundle the rich, infinitely dimensional human being into all of these little categories, But then there's this other part, which is that first of all, uh, you can't make a one-to-one map of the world. It would take too much. It would take more than a world to make a map of the world, right? So, and we don't know ultimately what ecosystem services are. Like, we don't really, I mean, we know that we get oxygen and other nutrients from a tree, but we don't really know, the counter currents between these two different kind of like prediction and understanding, reduction and emergent thinking. They're everywhere. So, you get to a point where you're like, all right, well, maybe it's helpful to think about the rainforest in terms of the invisible labor it's performing for the human economy, in the same way that like a human mother is performing invisible labor by raising children that supports the human economy. She doesn't get paid, but those kids buy candy on Halloween or whatever, like it's that kind of.
Yeah. I think, who called it the love economy? Is it, I can't remember, but yes, like it's sort of when you measure GDP or something, you don't take into account all the childcare, looking after elderly people, basically what women do, and kids. What women and kids do is only what men do counts on on the balance sheet traditionally.
Yeah, and I mean, there are all kinds of problems with that, obviously, but it's also true that we can't, and I would suggest probably shouldn't even try and come up. We shouldn't try to come up with a total, this idea of full cost accounting. What is the full cost of a given economic activity? We can't know that.
Yeah.
And this is the Jurassic Park thing. We can't know that for a lot of reasons, one of which is that we can't foresee all of the possible interactions that everything in the world is going to have with that thing. But then, it's also, I don't know. I mean, I want to make sure that I don't just like spin out here. The point is that, like, in this thinking, in thinking about things in this way, there is a softening for me and for other people, I think, around the boundaries of nature and culture, human and non-human, living and non-living. That's not to wash out the important differences, for instance, between running something on a in a brain versus running something on a silicon chip. And and we don't know what those differences are. If we were to model the neuron, like there's this thing about like people who believe in mind uploading, which I've been a critic of for over a decade. This idea that you can just sort of copy and paste the states of all the neurons from a person's brain into a computer and then like bring them into, resurrect them inside a machine. Okay, well, there's so many problems with that. One is that neurons also are not just using electrical and chemical communication, but apparently also like photonic and acoustic communication.
Nice.
So we're not measuring that. We don't know how, really. The other is that it's not just your brain. Your nervous system is spread through your entire body. But it's not just that. It's that you are a social organism that has lived in this environment and is scaffolded in all of these ways by, like as a social creature, you wouldn't have a name, you wouldn't have an identity unless other people had been around in your life to reflect you to yourself, to reinforce you, to help you understand what you look like to the other. And then living in a society, each of us have a contract with that society through the virtue of, like, I didn't used to believe in the social contract as a sort of philosophical object. I was like, yeah, point it to me. I never signed it, but you don't really sign it. It is a what Santa Fe Institute researcher Jessica Flack would call a collective computation made out of the local measurements, the local computations of everyone in the society, where she says, like, let's say you're a macaque and you see, you need to know where you stand in the macaque dominance hierarchy. You're not just wondering whether or not you're going to win or lose in a fight against another macaque. You're also wondering how all of the other macaques are going to see that fight, who they think is going to win that fight. And so you're carrying around a very lossy and fallible miniature copy of everyone else's beliefs. And that's the social contract, is that you actually, in a way, by being a social creature, by being a human, you're buffered on all sides by this, I guess, like a superego or something, this internalization of everyone around you and what you think they think is going on in the world. And so, like, just set aside for a moment the way that each of us is using our tools and our, I'm talking about even our homes, the spaces that we inhabit, the clothes that we wear, everything, the language that we speak, the behavioral practices, the rituals that we engage in. All of these are technologies. To the extent that it's instrumentalized, to the extent that it's used for something, it is a tool, and therefore the self is a tool. It's an instrument. I think that's the point the band Tool is making by calling itself Tool. But contemplating this stuff, you very swiftly get to a point that Gregory Bateson got to in the mid-20th century, where he starts talking about the mind at large, that each of us is participating in an act of nested cognition, in which, like, your individual cells are thinking things. There are constituents of your being. You are a constituent of some larger, ecosystemic and social corpora that are connected through mutual information exchange. There's like all these. So it's sort of an Indra's net kind of thing, where this vein of thinking takes you very quickly to the, something like questions about what is it that the Earth is thinking as a whole. What is it the galaxy is thinking as a whole? And then also way down, like into the Alfred North Whitehead process philosophy terrain, in which he's claiming that a photon is not merely a quantum of light, but a quantum of experience, of interiority, what he calls prehension. And so, that's okay. So here we are. That's where we start, and that's where I feel like questions about what is our relationship to technology, that's where that inquiry needs to start to make any kind of sense, because a lot of this sort of nature is over there, and we have a specific relationship to it, or technology is over there and we have a specific relationship to it. All of that thinking is actually standing in and dependent on, again, this sort of Cartesian, reductionist, analytical, rational, binary, this and that kind of cognitive process which is incomplete and inadequate for understanding profundity, basically. So, it's like you can't, I think you get to a point in these contemplations where it leads rather effortlessly, as long as you're not, resisting the sort of psychological horror of losing the sure thing that you thought you were standing on. You get to a point where we live in a really magical and mysterious world in which intention, agency, awareness, intelligence, and all of these sort of like ethical components that we assign to those things take on a new meaning and are found in places we wouldn't ordinarily find them in a modern world that assumes that there is life and non-life, self and non-self, the made versus the born, the natural versus the cultural. I think one of the more interesting nuances that I've learned at SFI since I started work here 3 years ago was from a paper called The Information Theory of Individuality, which said that basically it might be helpful to generalize nature as the inheritance of information through time, kind of like if you want to think about it like vertically, past, present, future, as things are being passed down, versus culture as that which is inherited horizontally from one's environment, which also occurs in time, obviously. But there are ways that like a coral reef or a spider and its web are not contained within the DNA, but specified relationally through the interaction with a particular geography, a particular space. And so the question of the individuality of a given system has to do with how much of what it is something that it is sort of shaped, scaffolded, or sculpted by the interactions between that system and its surroundings, versus its like how much information it carries within itself, its own informational integrity. And these are not there are no pure cases on either end of the spectrum, right? There's no in the modern sense, there's no purely self-determined person. There's no purely self-authoring, like God, man, kind of like I decide myself. And that's where like a lot of people get hung up on the free will thing, like that, of course, like all of your desires are conditioned, etc. On the other end of the spectrum, it's equally true though, which is that nothing is completely contingent on environment. There's a history that, there's something that it has inherited that so, in that line of thinking, that even something like a hurricane or a whirlpool in the bottom of your tub has some kind of identity, has some kind of, can be recognized as an individual. And of course it can, because we do that, because our nervous systems have learned to say, like, point to a tornado and say that's a thing, rather than just treating it as part of this, that's a figure versus the ground. So, when we talk about humans and technology, I think, and I would love to get into more of this, the conditions of, when you're talking about the specific conditions of what it means to be living through a particular historical moment where this stuff is especially obvious and turbulent and philosophically challenging and confusing. Yeah, just to say that these are, I think, sort of perennial matters that have come into focus precisely because we are in the midst of connecting all things to all things, and then also experimentally disconnecting them, because we're realizing that sometimes connecting everything to everything else is actually bad, You see, invasive species, zoonotic illnesses. The cancel culture arguably is something, like people from with one set of cultural expectations that suddenly have like leverage in other cultures where they may lack uh, essential on the ground in group understanding of what's being said. And like people, there's like slippery signification going on, people using the same words for different things, etc. And so we're getting into these these problems where, like, right before a civilization collapses, or right before somebody has a heart attack, or anytime you're about to see something on the verge of falling apart, one of the characteristics from complex systems theory that has been observed of this is that you get like what they call a spike in autocorrelation, where like suddenly everything within that system is connected to everything else, and it just like it breaks, because you do actually need some kind of partitioning. So I want to make it clear that I'm not saying, oh yeah, we should all just merge concepts willy-nilly here, but we are at a time when the conventional boundaries that we have erected between categories we assumed had some kind of objective reality are no longer holding the flood. Like the information that we're getting about the world, the knowledge that we're growing about the world is making it hard to keep those boundaries intact. And so we need to find where new provisional boundaries belong, that we can accept as, in some sense, constructed, but nonetheless pragmatic. That everything is up for revision, but that there are patterns that make sense. And so there's this sort of balance between the liberal or progressive and the conservative ethos in that, which is that the modern age came in and said, oh, like, all of this stuff is superstition, let's get rid of it, it's stupid, we have no evidence for it. Now we can say, well, we know that the way that we choose to investigate these things has all of these constraints, cognitive constraints, or constraints in the design of our technologies or whatever, such that maybe we threw away a well-established folk medical tradition 300 years ago, and now we're finally coming back around to it because we finally have the ability to understand. So maybe we should be careful about throwing away all of this other stuff too. That there are things that don't seem to make sense, but they work. And so we're at a point where we need to balance a number of different, I think this is maybe the takeaway, is that we need to balance different approaches to understanding and predicting, navigating the world, and not place all of our confidence and our sort of epistemic faith, I guess, in merely one of those approaches. So I don't know. That's a lot. That's I don't know where we're. So anyway, anyone who's listened through all of that, I think, is now like ready to anchor that in something a little bit more grounded and practical, as far as like how to make sense of the world that we're in, I hope.
I'm going to have to give you the reward for the longest answer there in in response. But yeah, no, okay. So there's a lot there, and so I just like jotted a few things down when you were talking. That so you're talking about this kind of reductionist side of things that's got a lot of predictive power. Working in very narrow confines, and then on the other side you've got this kind of complexity side. And I was thinking of, when you're saying, to understand anything, you have to understand how it's related to everything else. And it makes me think of Carl Sagan saying, to make an apple pie, you first have to invent the universe. And it goes that deep. And I was thinking how the cyborg is a kind of a symbol for that. So a human body and mind is an innately complex system, being what it is, and then you kind of add into that this kind of the predictive power of, say, like, you know, if you've when an iPhone, what you can do on an iPhone, you can do with your brain through whatever implant or some kind of organic computing, where you've got perfect recall, perfect navigation, instant communication with people around the world, and also off planet on space stations and things like that. That you bring those two together and you've got something really amazing, because say the complexity of a human system. I was just listening to your conversation with Eric Wager about precognitive dreams and stuff. So precognitive dreams comes out of the complexity of the human organism, but it doesn't have that kind of the predictive power of, say, that kind of Newtonian thing of saying, well, I know where that planet's going to be on this particular day, which your phone does so well, or, you know, some of these kind of more narrowly confined reductionist things. And I was just, bringing those together is really cool. And one thing that I've heard you talk about a lot, which I absolutely love, is the Mobius strip, where for those who might not know, it's a loop of tape. You cut it, do a half turn, tape it back together. It's the simplest way to do it. And it's if you run your finger along the surface, it's basically, it has one side. It looks like it has two sides, but it doesn't. And that kind of applies to what you were kind of talking a little bit about panpsychism there. Recently read Annika Harris's book on consciousness, which is a really great book. I would recommend it. Sam Harris's wife. And she's sort of coming out of the closet as a panpsychist. That, you know, makes sense from the way she was seeing it, that consciousness is a fundamental substance in everything. That there's nothing is not conscious to some varying degrees. And I think what you were saying about how, you know, things that were seen as superstitious in the past are kind of being dusted off and looked at again. And I think, like, the animism of indigenous cultures and sort of shamanism and that, you know, contemporary people look at that as something that belongs to a past era. But then there's this sort of very rigorous scientific and philosophical modern contemporary way of looking at it, which we call panpsychism, which is, you know, it's a kind of an evolved type of animism in a way. So I think this feeling of being dragged into the meshing with technology, and the kind of fear that goes along with it. I think you're right to point out that we've been in that situation forever anyway. It is actually a natural process, but there is, I don't know, I've just lost the thread too. You're the one that had the bad night's sleep. I think your coffee's just kicking in by the looks of it.
Let me pop in there and say, I think that this is, you spun out at precisely the spot that we actually needed to pause and explore some things, because, and as is often the case, I have been talking to my friend Robert Point in Spain about working with him and his the groups of people that he teaches over at Yellow. It's like a creative kind of learning group about what he calls the Jeep tour on rough terrain, which is what the president of SFI described my communication style when I got hired there. How he described it, which is appropriate because I used to lead these. I was very early on in my teenage years, I volunteer in a paleontological field crew in Wyoming in the summers, and I got to, conscribe my Jeep into service as a field vehicle, and once got it stuck in the creek out there in the Wyoming Badlands,
All right.
and had to just sit there and wait until they could go into town and bring back a winch and drag me out of the creek. And there are those times that you get stuck in life and are forced to sit and contemplate, and I consider those especially sacred. The illness that overtakes you when you're working too hard and forces you to reconsider your life, these kinds of things. So yeah, where did we spin out, and why here? What is it about this landscape that is asking us not to just cruise on by, but actually sit and look at what's going on? And I think you found the spot where this is what really matters to people when they talk about technology. It's not that technology itself has some kind of innately problematic condition that we need to I would say like bulwark or firewall from ourselves, because of course those are both technologies also. It's, once you expand the definition of technology to, include anything that is used for something else, then, the questions of like, well, what do I mean? Like, what am I afraid of? What am I worried about with, say, Cambridge Analytica using Facebook metadata to manipulate populations into voting a particular way in an election? And it's really, I think, about the asymmetry of control surface, if you will, that someone has information on me that I don't have about them, and they're able to use that to manipulate me in ways that I don't understand, or I cannot perceive, and I cannot reciprocate. I wrote a piece a while ago. I wrote a series of pieces actually on my experience with Google Glass, because I was a sort of reluctant beta tester for this back in 2013. I like to do this kind of thing. I like to see a problematic new technology emerge and then rush in and explore it and see if there are ways to make of weapons the instruments of art. People tend to think that it cuts the other way, that everyone talks about weaponization. But I remember years ago, I heard a talk by Jaron Lanier, who invented virtual reality, and he said it's a two-way street. Cannons are hammered down into bells, and bells are hammered down into cannons, and it just depends. And so I think that there are incentives. I think that the landscape is kind of tilted toward the stupid, most obvious, crass, foolish thing you can do with the technology is actually slightly easier than using it wisely. And that's always going to be the case no matter what it is. And that's a problem. And that's innately a problem. And that's a problem that is not new to technology. That's a problem with everything that we're already using comfortably. But people tend to think of technology in this way of like everything that was invented since I was 10 or whatever, like everything, that's come online since I developed a model of the world, and they ignore everything that has come since, and they ignore the historical precedent. And so I am not here to say, oh, well, you're just saying the same, you're just ringing the same alarm bell that someone was ringing 5,000 years ago about the invention of writing or whatever it is. What I'm saying is that people have had similar concerns for similar reasons, and we should attend to their arguments about those things. For instance, Neil Postman in Technopoly, his book, talks about there is a a story about the invention of writing with Thoth, the Egyptian god of writing, in which Thoth has created this thing and he's presenting it, and I forget the recipient of this exchange. Who is it that warns Thoth about this? But they're, this is saying basically like the problem with this is that you're going to get lazy and you're gonna stop remembering things because you won't have any need to, because they will be at hand. And Nicholas Carr wrote this book in which he talks about the use of Google's turn-by-turn map instructions and how memory is in the brain. It seems to be built out of the more primitive parts, or like pieces of brain that were used for orienting oneself in space. And so if you are not exercising those networks in your brain, then they decay. And people who never learned to navigate space but relied entirely on turn-by-turn map instructions have a weaker sense of, ultimately, of like memory than of people otherwise. This is why like old people who live in walkable neighborhoods suffer less mental decline, because they are continuing to move their bodies, to walk around, to orient themselves in space. And so, a friend, Noah Allaire, a friend of a friend, Noah Allaire in Albuquerque, wrote a piece called "Going Nowhere" on his blog, his Substack blog, Virtue Signal, last year, about COVID-19 and how the effects of lockdown have made it so that we don't, we have this weird experience of the pandemic where it seems like certain things, like for instance, and this has been quantitatively studied by Peter Dodds at the University of Vermont, where he was able to look at Twitter data and assess that what he called a collective chronopathy, which is how people experience the passage of time, that there were parts of last year where the August felt closer to March than June did, because we're not segmenting our time episodically as we ordinarily would on days when we at a certain given time every day, we get up, we go out, we get in the car, we commute to work, we move ritually through these thresholds, into a new segment of space and time that the brain can then say is, oh, that's a new experience, and I'm going to twist the sausage here, and that's a new sausage. So 2020 is this giant sausage, and none of us know where we are in it, and that's generally true. I mean, basically, when we talk about what 2020 did to us, it's basically an amplification or an exaggeration of what is generally happening to us under the conditions of the digital technological environment. Namely, that space and time are getting warped and remixed in strange ways because, as Doug Rushkoff points out in his book Present Shock, Facebook remembers your whole history of social relationships. So you're still seeing news updates from your high school ex-girlfriend, that like in any previous generation, you would have lost touch with that person 20 years ago. And now they're just in your face every day. And there's this recurrence of memory that was never happening. And at the same time, Google is trying to predict what you're going to search before you even search for it, where you're going to be at this time next year. And so the presence and the persistence of past and future have impinged on this moment in a way that is erosive to the very idea of a linear continuity of space and time. like the idea that like I am here today, and then tomorrow in this, in this future, like over there, spatialized as in front of me for some reason in most human cultures. So all of that is falling apart, and of course it's disorienting and upsetting. But like, so that's like half the fear. But then the other half of the fear is, amidst this sudden and kind of traumatic dunking into an environment in which we have lost our sense of orientation, uh, we also no longer know who we are dealing with. That we live in a kind of a liminal zone that used to be reserved for special feast days or other holy days.
It's like
Yeah,
the whole planet's gone on a vision quest.
indeed.
In a whiteout, like, it's like we're in Alaska or somewhere, and we've been in a whiteout in an igloo with just no bearings at all for left for days and days, and we just don't know what. I mean, and if it could, you extend the metaphor to, let's say it's just the time of year where it's eternal sunshine and there's no off. But so it's just like you don't know what time it is, where it's up or down, how long you've been there. And yeah, I mean, I've definitely been feeling the effects of that for sure. And my life has started to reflect it. It's like there were things in the diary every week that I used to do, but it's, as you say, it's all kind of like blurred out. And then it's difficult to sort out your memories in some kind of chronological sequence, definitely. And it just, time doesn't feel the same, which is a weird thing to say, but I haven't heard anyone else like articulate like the way you did, and it's true. And there's, which is, again, it's an opportunity to recognize that. I mean, that's the whole thing with a vision quest, is you go off, you experience time differently. And if you add psychedelics into it too, then, the experience of time is even is stretched even further. And I think to just recognize how malleable our perception of time is a really important thing to do. And because it disrupts our habituation, and that kind of sensation of when everything's all planned out on your calendar and you're just walking through your life and then you die, whereas it's like when you lose your moorings, you have to brighten up your consciousness of the moment, and actually kind of, those, that's one I've heard people talk about. You're kind of in moments where people fall off a building or something, time goes really slowly because the amplitude of your consciousness just goes through the roof, and you're almost recording the moments as they go past with really, really high frame rate. And something kind of similar happened when you're not, sometimes you feel like, where did that day go? Because you've just been in this whirlwind of being blown around. Whereas if you've got a day where you've got unstructured time, it can feel like quite a long day because you're kind of you're out of that automated mind thing, and you're actually much more present. So although it's disorientating, I think there's something in there which is that might actually serve people who take it. I think it's like I'm always really keen to take opportunities when they arise and not to let them slip by, because like a lot of people would have, this kind of that feeling of floating around in spaciousness. They might be like really keen to get to the end of that, just so they can get back to their lives. And in a sense, we all feel a bit like that. But to not rush out of these things, it's a bit like a health crisis or something. you kind of want to rush to the end of it to just get back to being healthy again, and not actually feel into what that health crisis has actually brought up in your own psyche, in terms of changing the way you see your life.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I would only add to that that there's, to stack onto the analogy you offered, that this is the sort of endless psilocybin come up that doesn't seem to ever stabilize into something like, finally we've made it. That, of course, because what we're talking about is something that's happening at the planetary scale, and it's an historical event that arguably started hundreds of years ago, and so we don't really know where we even are in in this transition itself. All of the argument about collapse or transcendence is ultimately an argument about, how long we'll be waiting for Godot, I guess, or something. Like, it's, is this an S curve kind of thing where it finds a new level and it stabilizes there? Is it a collapse? Is it, and that's all foolishness, because that's assuming that we can map everything on this two-dimensional plane.
It's modeling, like, I mean, to in COVID, all these kind of government advisors have been running these models about what's going to happen, and they've all been wrong. And at that kind of, oh yeah, we're heading for collapse, or we're heading for the singularity, or whatever. It's based on modeling, which doesn't have the complex. Well, no modeling can have the complexity that you were talking about at the beginning of our conversation as part of it, because that's just impossible. So it's we're always missing the mark with that.
Yeah, and what more, I think it says more about the bias of our local assessments of the world than it says about the world, because one of the things that's really common in discussion of indigenous futurism and in Afrofuturism is that we are in the post-apocalypse already. That that people who are worried about the coming collapse or coming dystopia are ignoring the fact that they're living in this like bubble of privilege that is floating on top of a sea of the end of worlds that supported that facilitated this, right? Like,
so
I'm
you're
sitting here in
talking
Santa
about
Fe.
this sort of Kali Yuga type kind of thing.
Well, I'm talking about like here in Santa Fe, one of the oldest cities on the continent. We have, the indigenous pueblos, and then we have the Spanish colonial settlement, and then the American army came in the 19th century and took over from that. And this is like at least 3 different eschatological moments. If you just look at this landscape as a landscape, right? Like as a thing, it's like, well, there was, whose world is ending is the question, right?
Yeah.
And so at any rate,
yeah, it's like the dinosaurs world was ending while the mammals were just getting started, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, yeah, exactly, the where you decide to twist the narrative sausage is it's not so easy, because it's the point, I guess, if I'm giving anyone a point to this conversation, it's just to acknowledge the fact that, like, yes, there are good reasons to start and end a story somewhere, but stories exist for the purpose of telling, as a way of navigating a high dimensional space of experience that's not the whole thing. It's what we were talking about earlier with ecosystem services. It's like we can tell ourselves, any model that we make of this, we can tell a story, but we know that we're not capturing the whole thing. And so the point with that is that as space and time reconfigure, it's not just that stuff happening around me reconfigures, because I am also made of space and time, right? So my identity, my subjectivity, my interiority is suddenly no longer encapsulated neatly within me, but appears elsewhere. People in a state of shock, having synchronicities, this kind of thing, where like a loved one dies, or you go through like a horrible divorce or something, and suddenly like everything starts, the world becomes numinous and full of meaning, and like everything starts making sense. And this is, we talk about like, okay, yeah, you're standing on solid ground, but that solid ground is still just a ball floating in space.
Mm.
And at any rate, what I'm getting at is that like there's a decentering that's part of this that leads to questions that allow us, that it gives us some leverage into like, okay, exactly what is problematic about certain kinds of technological embrace. It's not, for instance, a problem.
Just so to give a real world
Yeah.
example of this, my son who's 7 loves his iPad, and I'm there. I grew up, before the I've spent half my life before the internet and half of it kind of after, before the internet became mainstream and all that. And so I was 7 in a very different time, and I'm looking at my son playing on his iPad, the amount that he does, and I'm just asking myself, is this good or is this bad? I don't actually know, because I can't see where this is all leading. And it's a bit like, I used to play computer games back in the day when they were, on a BBC Acorn computer, those ones and stuff like that, and then Nintendo, the original Nintendo console, all that stuff. I look at it now, it's so crap compared to what my son's playing. But I was playing that, and I'm sure older people like my grandparents would look and they think, oh, why is he playing on that ridiculous thing? Or it's like going to rot his brain, all that kind of thing. And then, but I think it was fine, and I kind of, I try to look from the outside at myself, looking at my son, trying to judge what he's doing, and it's a very difficult one to call. I mean, your kids are pretty young, but that's coming your way, and and looking around, nobody seems to have the answer. I mean, you listen to one person, they say, listen to, some TED Talk person's talking about video games and all the benefits. And then, you look at someone else and they talk, all the experts, they're coming out with all the different opinions. And then, but that doesn't really help you, because you're the parent and you're responsible for your child's welfare. You've got to write a story. It's coming back to this thing about the story. It's all unknown. We don't know the future. All the experts are saying different things. You feel unsure yourself, but you need to kind of build some kind of narrative for your family to travel along inside. Otherwise, that's bringing some kind of order to the chaos. Otherwise, you're just left with the chaos and potentially bad decisions. And it's pretty stressful having that on your shoulders as a parent.
Yeah, so that's just it. Is that I tend to think of things in terms of conservation. That if energy and momentum are conserved, if like these basic things are conserved, then maybe subjectivity is conserved such that when I am overwhelmed by a flood of information, like you're talking about, like, falling off a building, this kind of thing. These moments where you are so dilated, you're just sensitive to and processing everything that's happening, that there's no room for you left in those experiences.
Yeah.
But the funny thing about those experiences, DMT being a trophy example, is that when you disappear, when the light, when the so-called light goes off inside, then suddenly the lights are on outside, quote unquote, quotation marks on everything I'm saying here, every single word. The subjectivity finds itself suffused in everything else. And like my experience of that sort of psychedelic apotheosis is, and this comports with lots of brain research into people who have like sleep paralysis and other related disorders and mystical experiences and so on, is that you, like, the so-called ghost in the machine, the assumption of a presence of a being is that all of us walk around haunting ourselves all the time and not asking it, not questioning it, but that haunting is of an idea that there is a person there, that you've developed this model of a person. And but that it doesn't have to be inside you. Actually, it can be redistributed. And so there are, where are you is an interesting question when you, like your son, might be gathering information all over the world and using that to assess and that has its hooks in the emotional regulation, the psychosomatic enactment of whatever's going on at any given moment. And this is, again, talking back to invasive species and the collapses of boundaries and the whole Jurassic Park thing. There are, Terence McKenna described this kind of thing as a divine invasion, where a higher level of order erupts into a lower level, manifests itself. But the point is that this is a here there be tigers, is really what I'm saying, is that we have, in this liminal space, we're suddenly both less certain of our own center as a self, and then suddenly also more aware of the possibility that the rope, I was like, "Ooh, I saw a snake. Oh no, it's just a rope. Oh, but wait, that rope itself might be a snake. That rope might have its own sort of object agency, its own identity, its own thing." And so we live in this foreign, willful, and mysterious world in which the self that has sort of been drained out by understanding me as this nexus of processes, relations and goings on. All of that drains out, and then suddenly you see that agency in everything else as well. And so we're back in the wilderness. Like this is actually, I think, in a way, a more authentic and candid and honest accounting of the state of things, and the modernity paradigm of, you know, the walled city, you know, we've got our thing here and there's that thing over there. The two ways thing doesn't hold. Like, it's clear why that made sense as it did. So yeah, so I mean, ultimately it comes to a question of like, who is watching me, who is telling me what to do, where are my desires coming from? Like, let's really anchor this in like a almost a, I guess, Buddhist, you know, karma kind of inquiry. I am the intersection of an infinite number of colliding infinities. You know, where did they originate? You know, you get to this it's very easy to fall into a trap here of paranoia, of
Yeah.
feeling like excluded or hunted or isolated or targeted or preyed upon. But that's only for people who have like sort of half swallowed the gnosis of what this is, because you're part of that conspiracy.
Yeah. So, um, I kind of, what you're saying is that we're all panicking because this moment we're in feels really weird, and disorientating, but that's always been the case anyway. It's just the veil's been drawn back on it, you know, recently, with the sort of accelerating technology and us being kind of sucked into the machine is sucking itself inside of us. And I mean, it's not just about technology. I mean, just the moment we're in, there's you know, environments and COVID and all sorts of crazy stuff going on that's really disorientating. So it's always been like that, but we're just sort of recognizing it more now. But then there's this saying which you know, that when things get weird, the weird go pro. I think it was at Hunter S. Thompson. So, you know, to offer some people people who have actually waded through this rumble in the jungle, and are still here, probably could do with some kind of way. You know, how do the weird go pro? I mean, I just give one example, is Donald Trump. You know, the despicable person he is. You know, the weirdness of the internet, the kind of collapsing of truth and all of that stuff. Donald Trump somehow, just through who he is, managed to go pro. You know, in this kind of, in the weirdness of the internet world, and managed to swim somehow on this swim on this complete amorphous, blobby, you know, unmoored from any, you know, the empiricism and truth and all of those things that we've held dear. He just kind of shat on the whole lot and floated like some, you know, kind of, he's like, I don't know, like the Baron from June, you know, just this, he's just, there's so much chaos inside, you know, just inside himself as a man, but he was just like, yeah, you know, he came out on top, you know, while we were all fumbling around trying to find something to hang on to. He just didn't give a fuck. So in a way, you know, although I think he's an appalling example of a human being, really, you know, to aspire to. He managed to go pro somehow in the weirdness, and I think there's a lesson to be learned there. I mean, I don't know, kind of exactly what. Well, one of the things perhaps is that he doesn't even seem to. He doesn't care that things are weird. You know, it's like, you know, some people are sort of, it's like things are weird. It's there's no truth. I can't get a handle on things. He just seems to thrive on that, and he doesn't really care. And it's so many liberal, postmodern, sensitive people just care so much that you know, they lose their sense of humor and just spin out as a result of that. And so, I mean, yeah. So what I'm asking is, like, have you, in your many conversations with people who, you know, who are the Aragorns that are out in on this kind of weird wilderness, you know, going, some of them are going pro, I assume. You know, what are people saying?
Well, it's funny because it's, you know, to just tip my hat to the paradox of this. To go professional suggests that you are optimizing yourself for a stable environment in which you understand the incentives and can therefore excel at a given allocated task. When the going gets weird, the weird turn pro. That requires a specific type of character that scrutinizes optimization itself. It scrutinizes the idea that I know what I am doing at any given moment and what the costs and benefits of that activity will be. I think, you know, as a son and a father, I'm now, you know, like standing here looking at either horizon and looking at the way that my own father was able to make it through his career, feeling like he knew what he was doing. That in his job he was creating a specific kind of value, that it was giving this particular benefit to the world, that he knew where his money was coming from. One of the more foundational disagreements that I ever had with him over a check paid at lunch was about where the money came from for that lunch. Where, you know, he said it came from his employers, and I said, well, as I said, no, it came from the customers of your employer. Ultimately, I have everyone to thank for this lunch, you know, and like who was paying them, and like how far out can you go? How broad an arc are you willing to draw for your gratitude? And at some point, you know, does it really make sense to be thanking the bacteria living in the intestine of someone living across the planet 100 years ago?
Yeah.
For like on your, you know, when you receive the Academy Award? I mean, how deep was their contribution? You know, so there are ways to establish like provisional, like a thermocline, you know, where the water goes, like the layer at which the water suddenly becomes cold. You know, there are these natural boundaries even in continuous substances. And so I think about it in that way, that like, yeah, there are, you know, yes, I am like one with everything, but at the same time, I am a primate capable of forming deep emotional relationships to roughly 150 people, you know? So, eh. But so to your point about like, what does it look like to turn pro in the weird? One of those things is that uh, that humility that comes with not, frankly, not knowing, not being able to know for sure that you are ultimately doing the right thing, because you never know. I mean, really, there's immense spiritual opportunity in accepting that so much of the suffering in this world has come from people who were trying to make the world a better place.
Mm. Makes me well, I mean, yeah, you were talking to Daniel Schmachtenberger, and he was saying how he worked in environmentalism, and they were trying to discourage people from poaching elephants. So they put these big high fences around the area where the elephants lived, solve the problem of the elephants being poached, but all the poachers had no other way to make money, so they went off and started poaching gorillas instead. And it's like, that and it may it's going back to what the beginning of our conversation about complexity, that if you take a simple action, because life is so complex, the knock-on effects are often so far from what you'd want. Yeah, and I can see how that actually applies to sort of going pro in the weird, is that trying to be successful in the weird is almost like the same kind of thing, that you're making such a narrow you're taking such a narrow set of actions or perspectives, just because when you use your will, you narrow things down, and the result of that could be really, yeah, it could be so far off what you actually want. So then the kind of, we're left with, like, the metaphor is more kind of surfing on the chaos of the frothy coastal zone. So you've actually, rather than say, right, well, I'm going to turn this massive waves into some piece of architecture, bend it all to my will, you're more kind of, yeah, surfing's a bit more, well, you're sort of becoming one with the waves, but you're also you're not too. Yeah, what do you think of
Yes.
that?
Well, I mean, surfing is a perfect metaphor for this. I've loved that analogy for a very long time. The it's a good one because the amount of presence required to be in one's feet while you are surfing, to
Mm.
like, to be one with and not, right, as you said. This is the breakwater upon which we see white crests as language attempts to convey in its current capacities something that is, you know legendarily difficult to express with what we have right now, which is that, again, this flow state where you are so preoccupied, you're so immersed in the activity that you are not paying attention to yourself. Like, the experience of the self disappears, but you are actually, in certain ways, like, more aware than you normally are, because you're not just relying on backstops on, you're not just, there are fewer expectations, and there's more attentiveness to the subtleties and the textures of things as they're happening. So in practice, as a musician, I tend to think about it as like three regimes of musical composition. There's the symphony, where everyone is capable of playing from the same score. They all have different parts. There's a single composer. The score is pre-written. We're all going to rehearse and we're going to perform it together. And there's a kind of listening that goes on in that, and a presence to what is not on the page and is currently unfolding. But it's in some way, I guess, informationally less than what's on the page. And then there is the free jazz ensemble. I talked about this with Tyler Margitis in Complexity podcast a couple episodes ago, where everyone is attentively listening to everyone else. And a free jazz ensemble in mathematical denomination looks a lot like an ecosystem. It looks a lot like things sort of evolving. It's spontaneous. It's this improvisational kind of, oh, that's what you're doing. Oh, I'm gonna adjust what I'm doing a little bit to meet that. And so, again, with the information theory of individuality piece of it, there is that's where culture or the environmental scaffolding starts to assert itself. And then at the very far end of that, on the other end of that, is where there is no score and no stable environmental feature. It's like not only do you not have sheet music to play from, but you don't know who you're playing with. You don't know what key you're in. You don't know what time signature you're in. You don't know what's coming next. So in that chaos, so that's like complication, complexity, and chaos, those three regimes, right? It's complicated to be part of an orchestra. It's complex to be part of a free jazz ensemble, and it's chaotic to not know what musical period, style, or aesthetic, or tonal space, or whatever you're working from. So you might as well just roll the dice. And like in ecosystems, you see this, all three of those strategies exist at all times in different ways everywhere. And they create each other. So arguably the reason we are in this conversation at all is because people devoted themselves for hundreds of years to the eradication of chaos, and in so doing executed what it's a term I learned from Alan Watts, enantiodromia, which is the running into the opposite of, like you push so hard in one direction that you end up creating its polarity. And so by trying to regulate everything, we structure the world such that like every corner is a new opportunity for something to grow in that corner. It's like, and so I guess what I'm saying is that it kind of helps to know where you are in, like, locally. Maybe there's a kind of a cheap map to this would be like the micro, meso, and macro, or like local, regional, global. And what looks chaotic at the level of like your genetic evolution at the micro might only be because you are at the meso level, you're at the human level, and you can't actually see what's going on. You can't understand all of the influences and the forces at play. And the same is true up at the macro. So there's a bit of complexity there in the indeterminacy of what we see at like street level, I guess, this middle layer in our lives. Um, yeah, I don't know. I guess what it comes down to is, and you already said as much, is that the way to hack it with this weirdness is, I guess, to just do your best, but to be willing to change your mind, to accept defeat, or to recast defeat in a new light according to victory on terms that you had previously not considered. Like that suddenly a new dimension opens up in the landscape and you realize that you were assuming your model only accommodated certain incentives, and there's whole other kinds of value that you'd never considered over, like, on some orthogonal axis. And so your math is wrong, and so you got to like spin the thing, and then suddenly it looks like a loss was a win in some other way. And this has been something I've been unpacking on Future Fossils a lot recently. I spoke to Chris Ryan, who wrote Civilized to Death, The Price of Progress, talking about, well, what do we mean when we talk about collapse of civilization? Like, in what ways is collapse bad? I mean, collapse is not the same thing to everybody. Collapse has happened already many times. Collapse is ongoing. Collapse is something that, it's not monolithic. It's occurring at all scales, to different degrees, different places, and to different people. So, in some ways, it might be a good thing, in the way that, like, getting fired from a job that you hate might be a good thing. It might be difficult because you've optimized yourself to that job, but you've adapted yourself to an unhealthy environment. There's like there was like Krishnamurti. He was like, it is a, it's not a mark of a it's not a mark of health to be well adjusted to a sick society, something like that. Yeah. So it's about openness, humility, curiosity, but like all of these things to measure, within reason. Because obviously it doesn't serve you to be so open that you will just listen to anybody, right?
We've seen quite a bit of that this last year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really just, I'm very bad about getting into the like the philosophical bramble about all of this stuff, but like ultimately it kind of just boils down to a kind of Copernican turn to the interrogation of our sense of exceptionalism, our sense of priority, our sense of center or importance or completeness or knowledge or total final understanding, or any of these things. And just but also not a complete surrender to not knowing, because something must be done. I mean, again, we got to be careful with the sort of like dualistic versus non-dualistic language here. I mean, simply because you know that you cannot come to a final destination, that's not an excuse to give up trying to know, trying to understand or predict.
Yeah, I think there's a word that I'm thinking of is being playful. and 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 I think also being a generalist is actually so. There was a time where being a generalist was sort of seen as a lesser calling. It's like specialized. It's like that very narrow part of chemistry, becomes your speciality, and you know nothing about anything else in life other than that particular chemical bit of the world. And it seems to be becoming more and more, perhaps as people are understanding the complexity of our time and the uncertainty of it and the weirdness of it, that there seems to be a resurgence of people embracing the life of being a generalist. So, if I look at, your life, you're a musician, you're a visual artist, a conversationalist, podcaster, you work for this science place, and and you've probably got all sorts of other interests that I don't know of, but people that are playful and I think as an extension of that playfulness is this wandering off into the life of being a generalist, lots of interests and all of that kind of stuff, and I think that kind of serves you in that the way you're saying about just adapting to change all the time, yeah, I think basically that's about all I've got to say on it all. So it's been a very liminal conversation, and I think that's honest to the moment we're in. It's like there's a lot of people out there talking in very certain terms about all sorts of things, like, oh, I know what this is, or have you done your research because I know this, or whatever. There's so many very, very strong voices out there, and I think if you can collapse into the simplicity of just like, oh, I can't bear it anymore, I'm just going to have to pick one of these things off the shelf that people are offering me, and there's a kind of wilder soul that doesn't want to do that. That I those are the people I appreciate out there, who they've got the kind of courage to not take that easy route, and to stop thinking, stop playing, and yeah, it's kind of life on the frothy edge in the wild spots, and I think in a way maybe I'm forcing this on it, but to kind of try and circle back to what we were talking about at the beginning, the wildness that's out there is also inside us, and I think to actually admit your own wildness. An example is like, sometimes I think, how would I be able to face death, or those kind of things, and my kind of answer to it nowadays is that the wildness that I see out there, like if I'm standing on a cliff edge and I'm just looking out at the wild ocean, that wildness is in, I am that wildness. And in that the ultimate moment of wildness, of dying, that wildness comes forth inside you. You don't have it all the time. You wouldn't have any use for that wildness. But in these extreme moments, it kind of comes forth. I was thinking about also that guy who cut his arm off with a penknife, the famous bloke who got trapped in the cave. You look at that and you think, how could I do that? But the you that would be doing that is not the you now.
Indeed.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's I'm just spent conversationally here. And I think so. Just, you know, for those courageous and wild souls that have made it right to the end of this conversation, I think, you know, kind of what we might be promoting here is sort of a slight dampening down of the fear, because shit's been weird forever, and an embracing of complexity, you know, and actually taking the time to understand how complex life is, and just sucking that up, you know, letting that in and let that change you. And I think play is a response to complexity, you know. It's like, or chaos. Or so if you put kids into a room, into a chaotic system to get where they're in a room, they're just running around like mad, they start to kind of form some kind of play out of it, and that's their response to chaos or the complexity of the social situation they're in, and all of that, the physical environment. And as adults, I think we lose that adaptation to these unformed spaces. If you put a group of adults in a room with nothing to do, they all start kind of whistling and looking at each other awkwardly, you know. Yeah, I don't know. There we go. That's my parting words.
For sure, I would say that play is, you know, you've touched on something really important here, which is that it seems people generally, we struggle to identify the utility of play or of art for civilization, and yet we acknowledge that this is what makes us human. You know, that, I mean, obviously play is something that is found all over the living world, but why is that? Suddenly it must have a use. It just doesn't have a use at the time scale of the game itself. You know, if you think this, and this is ultimately it, is that we are playing a game in society, attempting to meet specific metrics to impress other people, to, you know, to meet some kind of benchmark in team effort. But those are, in the words of James Carse, finite games. And that's different from the broader infinite game, of which those finite games are subsets or slices.
Yeah.
You know, anything that we can optimize is a game that will eventually run its course. And play as a strategy for learning one's environment, for adapting to one's environment, for learning the features that could not be inherited. You know, the more complex an organism is, the longer it seems to remain a child.
Yeah.
You know, the longer it plays, because the more complex an organism is, well, that's because its environment is complex, and it has had to evolve to meet the complexity of its surroundings in order to navigate them. And so you play because everything we do changes the world that we thought we already knew. And so obviously we as adults must do things. We must get things done. There are things we have to, you know, I have to feed my kids. But I should not get too certain that I know how to feed my kids at a time like this.
Mm.
I should not get, I'm for personally, I'm at a time when I'm really considering the possibility of finding new kinds of work, and am daunted by the injunction to shed or at least deprecate the identity that I have aggregated or accumulated or whatever over the years that I've been working in this current role. But it's because I've found a bigger game.
Mm.
I'm not just trying to be good at my job anymore. I'm trying to be a good ancestor. And so can I be like, is doing this particular job that? So it's about, as far as play is concerned, how would you, listening to this, reconcile the tensions between all of the different demands made upon you at different scales of time and space, between what matters in this moment right now, the impulse of your hunger, the awareness that your brain evolved within a sugar limited environment, and that you have biases that skew you toward wanting junk food, the responsibility that you have to the people who depend on you to live for as long as you can. I mean, all of this is present in like that decision, like, do I eat the candy bar? Like, am I going to let my daughter just pound Halloween candy today?
Mm.
No, of course not. I have to teach her how to do that marshmallow experiment where they tested kids to see if they could postpone gratification. Well, it's obviously you don't delay all gratification. That's not the point. If the executive circuits of your brain took over from everything else, you would fall over dead. I mean, because they're too slow. They're too slow to respond to all the other stuff. I mean, that's kind of like the, not to just like, open up a whole new conversation here in the final minute, but that is ultimately behind why we have these issues with like the evolution of technology versus the pace of regulation to address those technologies. It's like that gap's not going to close, because it just takes longer to think about something than it does to do it.
Yeah. Well, and then you add legal process and lawyers back and forth, and the whole bureaucratic cycle to it. By the time that's all got a bow tied on it, the next, you're way behind.
Yeah.
On the innovation curve. Yeah.
So, folks, if you've managed to make it through the 2 hours of this, I applaud you, and I love you, and I would love to know who you are, and I would love to hear from you, and I would like to encourage you to experiment with which decisions in your life require deep thought and which decisions in your life can be made on a hunch. And to see where that takes you, and then to treat it like you are sailing, and that you can't just tack one course and expect it to take you there, but the winds change and the water changes, and something may work for a while, and you may wake up one day and realize that you're going to have to change it all, or you're going to sink. But I guess maybe that's it. It's less maybe surfing than it is sailing. We can sail through this, I think.
And if we don't, it's okay.
And if we don't,
because
maybe
we're
wash
not
up somewhere new.
What's that?
If we don't, it's not a sure thing that we'll drown. We might wash up somewhere wonderful.
Yeah. Well, Goodness me. So, where do people? There's your Future Fossils podcast, Complexity podcast. You have a Patreon thing. Then
Honestly,
what else? What
yeah.
what would you want to point people to?
I'm sure you can tell that I test things out all over the place right now. So I have fractional identities all over the web. I am trying to do my best to gather and publish everything through the Patreon account. And I suppose I am most committed among social platforms. If you want to try to find me on Twitter, I have a Facebook group for Future Fossils, but by the end of the year, I'm going to paywall that because the work of moderation is great and deserves financial remuneration.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But yeah, I would just, just look me up whatever way suits you, but don't expect to find everything in any one place. We didn't talk at all about my music, but in some ways I think the music that I have produced over the years, which can be found in its completeness on Bandcamp, and then, I've kind of staggered things out on other platforms, speaks in some way or performs or communicates this better, perhaps, than anything I could say about it. But yeah, I trust that the folks who really want to find me will. And I thank you for giving this time to this conversation, and for, on All Saints Day here, I just want to honor the holiness of sitting with these mysteries. And so thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael, for coming and doing this. And I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Absolutely, Ralph. Thank you.
I made all the music that I use in my podcasts. If you'd like to hear more of my music, please visit SoundCloud and check out my profile, Ralph Cree.